So the passage today, Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Yeah, you know it? David? Yeah? Sometimes. And it's going to be on the screen. And I'll read it from a translation. This is from a translation called The Voice. The Voice, if you're not familiar with it. It just kind of sheds a different light on this in the way way the Voice translates it. Here we go. So around the time of Elizabeth's amazing pregnancy and John's birth, the emperor in Rome, Caesar Augustus, required everyone in the Roman Empire to participate in a massive census. The first census since Quirinius had become governor of Syria. So what Luke is doing is he's placing all of this in a historical context, right? Saying this is what happened. And here's some of the surrounding factors that context in which it happened. Each person had to go to his or her ancestral city, which was common, to be counted. Mary's fiancé, Joseph, from Nazareth in Galilee, had to participate in the census in the same way everyone else did. Because he was a descendant of King David, Joseph, descendant of King David, his ancestral city was Bethlehem, David's birthplace. Mary, who was now late in her pregnancy, and as the messenger Gabriel had predicted, accompanied Joseph. And while in Bethlehem, she went into labor and gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped the baby in a blanket and laid him in a feeding trough because the inn had no room for them. Familiar story, right? Yes? This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let's take a moment and I want to just breathe a little bit. I'm going to give you a space to just kind of settle in. And there's so much going on around us, and sometimes it's helpful just to kind of take a deep breath and let that breath be a prayer. So let's do that for a moment. Just breathe in. Find yourself located here in this space, and as you breathe in, get a sense maybe of God's peace breathing into you. And then as you breathe out, maybe breathe that peace, that shalom out to the people around you in your life. And maybe that breath out is a prayer of peace for our nation, for our world as well. And now, Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts in this space be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. And everyone said, amen. So this Advent here at Asbury, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with people in the Christmas story who found themselves sort of drawn into the birth of Jesus in ways they did not expect, unexpected, and in ways perhaps we often overlook. And so last week, if you were with us, I spent a little bit of time talking about somebody like that. I talked about King Herod. King Herod is not somebody you're going to find in any nativity set. But I get the sense that maybe it would probably be a good idea, maybe if we included King Herod in the nativity set, if we included him more in the story, and as I said last week, not because we want to sort of dwell on the darkness, but because we want to be honest about the world's pain and the world's brokenness, because that helps us better understand and maybe even experience this light that Christ brings. So today I want to turn to another character in the story, one that there's no dialogue. This person never speaks. This person has no name. This person is barely mentioned at all. And if there's a mention even just indirectly. So I want to focus on that person, and that person is the innkeeper in the story. the innkeeper. I was thinking, even as I say that, I think that would be that could be a Netflix series, right? Can you imagine? Coming soon, the innkeeper. Yes? No? Nah. Before we go any further on that, I want to tell you that Paula Z, our kids ministry director, she sent a video to me this week, and it's about it's called "The Christmas Story as Told by Kids." And this video she sent has this little girl named Harper. She's 6 years old, and she's telling the Christmas story. And as kids do, she tells it beautifully and confidently, and with details that only children can imagine. And so this is how she begins. An angel came to Mary and told her she was going to have a baby. That's a good start, right, in telling the story. And then the narrator asks, how long was Mary pregnant with Jesus? And Harper pauses for a moment, and then she thinks about it, and she says, I think 11 years. That is a long dang time. 11 years. My wife was pregnant with our kids for 9, and that was enough. But then she gets to Bethlehem, and Mary knocking on the door, or Joseph knocking on the door, and the narrator asks, well, did the innkeeper have a name? And Harper says, I think so. And he said, well, what was the name of the innkeeper? And she thinks again, and she pauses, she says, offers her best guess. She says, Fred. Fred was his name. Fred the innkeeper. I kind of like that, Fred the innkeeper. So then she later explains that when Jesus was born, he weighed 25 pounds, and that the innkeeper said, there's a stable for a bed. And I just thought that was wonderful. There's one thing she's right about, though, right? We don't actually know the innkeeper's name. And for the sake of this message, if you don't mind, I thought, well, why not? Why don't we let Harper just guide us, and then let's, for the sake of this message, call him Fred, okay? Just so you have an image. Fred the innkeeper, okay? So you okay with that? I'm gonna call him Fred. All right. He's just this regular, ordinary, doing his best dude, you know, trying to make a living, caught up in a night that he never saw coming, and a story that he never dreamed that he would be a part of. So I want to talk today about what we actually know about Fred, okay? Fred the innkeeper, and what we've only imagined or assumed about him along the way. And then I would like us to sort of reimagine or reframe his story in a way that just might help us see ourselves through him. That's what I'm going to do, okay? Are you ready? Are you in? Back row? All right. So what do we know about Fred the innkeeper? The short answer is really not much. Hardly anything at all. Luke actually never mentions the innkeeper. He never says, the innkeeper says, there's no room here. He never says that. There's no name. There's no dialogue. There's no conversations. There's no personality profile. Fred's existence is just implied. Someone communicated that the inn was full, and that's it. But the interesting thing is that over time, we have tended to build this whole sort of story around Fred, this whole narrative about his life. I don't know if this has been your experience, but for the longest time, I would just hear that this innkeeper, Fred, was some sort of grumpy, cold-hearted, inhospitable, sort of an ancient Scrooge who slammed the door in the face of the Holy Family. That was my image. Anybody else? I don't know. Yeah, there you go. Because, I mean, what kind of person does not make room for Jesus? What kind of person doesn't make room? Huh. Everything we think we know, I think, is something that perhaps we have projected onto Fred. this narrative that we've built, it probably says a lot more about us than it does about him. Bethlehem was this tiny town, right? 200 to 400 people, and all of a sudden it's overflowing with visitors because of the census that we read about. Every home is likely to have relatives from all over the place, and maybe even friends of relatives, shoulder to shoulder, packed into this place on the floor. Have you had a Christmas like that in your home, where everybody's just packed in? Think about like a little Motel 6, and you got everybody's in there, and you have nowhere to go. Resources are stretched thin. Now imagine there is a stranger knocking on the door in the middle of the night, and this stranger is a woman in active labor. She's about to have a baby right on the spot. And every square inch of your home is already full. What are you going to do? And then you get remembered throughout the rest of history as the one who failed. Jesus. That's not really fair. So maybe we should consider that Fred wasn't a villain at all. Maybe he was just a human being like you, like me, just kind of doing the best he could in an overwhelming night. And that's where I think reimagining this story becomes maybe important for us. So let me ask you a couple questions. Think about this. What if the innkeeper, Fred the innkeeper, was just an overwhelmed host? That's all he was. Bethlehem chaotic, people everywhere. He is bone tired, he's overworked, he's stressed out. Doing everything possible just to manage this limited space, right? Trying to manage what's going on in his home. You've had one of those weeks probably, haven't you? Yes? When someone just asks one more thing of you and all you can think is, I ain't got nothing left. I'm just doing the best I can here. I wish I could do more, but the truth is, I'm running on empty. You ever had one of those days? Maybe a week like that? Tired? Stretched? At capacity? Emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you got nothing. You ever had that? I think some of us maybe during Advent feel that, we're living in this Advent season with the lights on outside, but a warning light that's going on the inside. Some of us are in that space, doing the best we can with what we have, and it just feels like it's not enough. Sometimes I think that the story of the innkeeper is told that as if he is that symbol of failure, But I think, truthfully, maybe he's just a human being. Maybe he got to the place in his life like us where he just had nothing left to give. So what if this sort of no room message in the gospel passage is not really about rejection? What if it's really about, what if it's about reality, right? What if our friend here was just heartless? What if he was just plain exhausted? Or imagine this. Here's another question. What if Fred was a creative problem solver? How about that? What if Fred didn't send Mary and Joseph, didn't want to send them away? What if he was scrambling? He was just trying to make something happen, trying to make anything at all work for this woman in active labor knocking on his door. And maybe the stable wasn't a dismissal of Mary, Joseph, and this baby to come, but just simply a compassionate attempt to help. Saying something like, I can't give you everything you need, but here's what I can do, right? Here's something that I can offer. It's not ideal, for sure. It's not comfortable. It's not the nursery, perhaps, that Mary imagined. But it's something. This creative act of kindness in a moment where Fred wished that he could do more. And I'm sure you've been there too, right? Where you're just doing your best with what you have, and what you have to give is not perfect. In fact, it's imperfect. But it's all that you can give in the moment. And you know what? I just want to say to anybody who is like in that position right now, it is okay to say that that is enough. To offer what you have, even imperfectly, and then to trust God with the rest of it. And then think about this. What if the innkeeper was actually a person of faith, like deep faith, Jewish faith, which hospitality was actually central to Jewish culture and Jewish life. You always welcome the stranger. Anybody who came to your door, you didn't have to know them, but anybody who came to your door, the culture was that you welcomed them into your space. You gave them space. You gave them food. You gave them rest. And welcoming the stranger was sort of this sacred calling of what it meant to live a life of faith. So what if Fred cared deeply about his faith, about honoring God, but he found that his values, what he really believed, he found his values colliding against the limits of his own space and time and energy? What if that was his reality? He had no idea who was standing at his door. No idea. But he still found space for them. Yeah. Even if it was far from perfect. A stable with animals, stinky animals, born among the dung. And maybe only later did he realize, like so many of us, as he looked back, oh, God was in that moment. And I missed it. Yeah, I don't know about you, but honestly, there are those moments when I can feel, like really feel that I'm sort of in the presence of something sacred, something holy. There are times when I can really feel that, and I know it. I know it in the moment. But there are times, in fact, probably most of the time, honestly, where I only recognize those moments in hindsight. Is that true for you too? Where you kind of look back and you kind of go, oh, God was in that place. In fact, I am here now because God was in that place then. And I didn't even notice it back then. But I notice it now. Maybe Fred understood that feeling too. Okay, so if we're willing to step back into the innkeeper's shoes, if we're willing to consider Fred's circumstances, I think it shifts the whole story. This is where I want to get to today. Maybe this story isn't really about rejection or failure. Maybe it's actually a story about limits, about limitations, about what we can and what we can't offer. And we're just simply doing the best we can. And maybe it's a story about God working through imperfect people, like you, like me. God working through imperfect people with messy lives in imperfect, messy circumstances. And here's the key truth, I think, for us today that I want us to carry with us. In all of that, in all the messiness, in all the imperfections, the limitations, and our lack of readiness to actually recognize when God shows up, Emmanuel comes anyway. God comes anyway. Ready or not. God's presence does not depend on being ready. It does not depend on being rested. And it doesn't depend on being resourced. It doesn't depend on any of that. In fact, if that is what is required, I think that the manger just stays empty. And Christ never will make it through the door of our lives. Jesus wasn't born into a prepared room or welcomed into this sort of curated nursery with matching bedding. He came into a world that was not ready. And he came anyway. God comes anyway, right into the messiness and the unfinished, incomplete, imperfect places of your life. Christ arrives anyway. And that's what we call the grace of God. And I think that's part of the miracle of Advent. That is Emmanuel, that God comes anyway. And the innkeeper becomes the first witness to that divine reality without even knowing it. Fred, unnamed, unknown, ordinary man, he ends up among the first to encounter the arrival of Christ. And my hunch is the same is true for us, that Christ will come unexpectedly in your life in faces that you do not expect, knocking on the door of your life, interrupting what you are doing, interrupting what you are thinking in the moment. And he comes in those moments that we are not ready for him. But the miracle is, God doesn't ask you for perfect faith. Just a little room. Just a little. A tiny corner in your life that you might be able to open up so love can take root. Even the smallest and imperfect yes to that can become holy ground. Because God is with us, folks. It says it right there on the screen. Right where we are. I suppose that's one of the things about communion, right, when we take it, that it's simply offering a little bit of a yes to God. Even a doubting yes, an imperfect yes. And when we take the bread and we take the cup, we're saying yes in some way, even to a tiny part of our hearts opening up. And it's actually, our yes is a response to God's yes to us. This communion is also about God's yes to you. We've been doing this for like 2,000 years. And every time we take it, every time, it's a way for your heart and mind to finally say again and again, to the grace of God, yes, I'll have some of that.